All right, how are we doing on the live stream? Thumbs up. We're live stream. Welcome for you who are joining us via the live stream. Welcome to all of you who have gathered here in person. We're here to talk about the continuation of our conversation that we started last week around this Holden Village partnership and proposal. And I really appreciate all of your thoughtfulness, your care, and your grace in this conversation. It has been truly tremendous. As I speak about this in the Synod office and with my colleagues around the cluster, it's just this resounding sense of joy and excitement and just how impressive this congregation is. St. Luke's is really an amazing place to have the capacity and the imagination to take on this kind of project. And so just know that from the bottom of my heart, we are so grateful for this conversation and this participation and partnership. Somebody asked me though, and I thought this is an interesting question, what is Holden Village? You're going there for this 18 months. Pastor Dwight's going to be here, all of these things. What is Holden Village? Holden Village started life as a copper mine in the 30s and the 40s. It was a mining town where people would live and work and extract minerals, copper, from the mountain. And then when copper prices in the early 40s took a dive, they closed the mine. And it was one of those scenarios where Holden Village just became a ghost town. The word was that there was no more work, and so they literally got up and left. There were still dinner plates on the table. There were still items and clothing in the houses, and they just left. And it sat vacant and idle for several years. And the mine company, was trying to sell it as a kind of Leavenworth-ish, kind of Swiss Bavarian resort village town kind of thing. And it's really difficult to get to Holden Village. Even today, it's not an easy journey to get to the village. And so it really wasn't a hot real estate commodity. They weren't having a lot of luck selling this. And then a guy named Wes Priebe from Issaquah, who was a student at Trinity Lutheran College, or the Bible Institute back then. It was Lutheran Bible Institute back then. He saw an ad in the classified papers and said, and remember classified papers? That was a thing. And he saw this ad, and he's like, hey, the Lutheran Church would be interested in that. And they were asking, some big amount of money, and Wes said, how about $1? And the mine company was like, no, thanks, that's cute, we're glad you're interested in that. And they had a little correspondence back and forth. And then eventually the mine company was like, fine, $1, it's yours. So then Wes, a student at LBI, went to the administration and was like, hey, guess what we just bought? What? It's just one audacious story after the other, the way the Lutheran Church acquired Holden Village. So it became a part of the Lutheran Bible Institute, and now it's eventually its own 501c3, it's its own incorporated thing, but it's in close partnership and relationship with the ELCA. So those early students and interested volunteers, they went up just to kind of assess what was up there, to take stock of the old mining buildings and bunkhouses and equipment and everything up there. And slowly they started building some capacity. And then the question back then was, what is Holden Village going to be? It's not really a retreat center. It's not really a Bible camp. It's not really any of those things. It's kind of all of those things. I kind of jokingly refer, half jokingly, that it's the closest thing that Lutherans would do to a monastery. At any given time, typically, there's about 100 residents that live there year-round, and they live this rhythm of life into which guests are invited to participate. There's morning matins, there's coffee break that usually has delicious cinnamon rolls. There's lunch together, there's work together, there's life lived in this rhythm, and then guests join in that rhythm of Holden Village. In the wintertime, it's a little bit quieter up there. There's not as many visitors and guests. Of course, for New Year's and Christmas and some of the holidays, it gets busy and gets full. They host J-term students through the month of January. So right now, there are arriving college students that will come spend a week up there from mostly Midwest universities, and Pacific Lutheran University sends a group up there. And in the summertime, they bring up teaching staff. And so there'll be resident scholars and theologians and artists, and they will come and they'll host a week of teaching or practice around some art or faith tradition. So it's hard to describe exactly what Holden Village is. It's all of those things. It's a life apart It's a life together, and I think it's a life for the larger church. What really excites me, other than just the location, it's nestled up in the midst of these incredible mountains. The backcountry skiing and the hiking and the fly fishing and all of that. Those of you that know me well know that that's close to my heartbeat. It's just this spectacular, beautiful setting that's a place away. But what really drew me to this was it's an opportunity for my family and I to live this way and to do this, to have our kids in the school and do all that stuff. But it's also an opportunity for us to think deeply about what the future of the church should look like. It's an opportunity for us to think carefully about what does it mean for us to be people who are gathered in the name of Christ, living out these faithful practices as best we can together and in the world around us. It's an amazing opportunity to have a very intense and intentional conversation about who we are as God's people today. Around 6,000 people a year go through the village as either short-term staff or visitors. And in partnership with the Holden Village directors, we could have a conversation and create listening spaces for what does it mean to be the church and have a really wide participation in this really broad conversation. The directors are really excited about this idea, about being a listening post, a place of experiment, and a place of learning. And the directors are thrilled to have St. Luke's as a partner in that. Not just me, but all of us doing this work of thinking deeply about the future of the church together. So I started thinking in terms of, wow, this could be an amazing learning opportunity. This could be a moment where we could really capture something really important. And then I was thinking, oh my gosh, if we're thinking about the future of the church, I have to have lunch with Dwight. Dwight has been a future church thinker and leader for a long time, and I've considered him a mentor and a friend and a font of wisdom. And we had lunch together, and he said, well, how are you? And I kind of shook my head and said, well, I'm good. I got this crazy idea. I'm curious what you think we could learn about the church from this. And Dwight got pretty excited about that. We had a really animated conversation about what could be learned from this moment and this opportunity, and my own excitement and passion about this. And then Dwight asked, well, what would happen at St. Luke's while you would be away? I said, well, I'm working on a cadre of people and leadership and all that kind of stuff. And Dwight said, I think I'd like to be a part of that. And my jaw dropped. It was almost like, oh my gosh, you would be a part of this. More than just a conversation partner, but a participant in this partnership and experiment. And I was just beyond delighted, so excited to have somebody that I so deeply respect and has been such a thoughtful faith leader in our community, an academic and thinker. To have that opportunity for me was just beyond tremendous, beyond aspirational. So well, what kind of role would you take on that? How big a part of this experiment do you want to be? And oh my gosh, all of these wonderful and loving and supportive conversations have brought us to this place where it's just a delight to be able to introduce you to Pastor Dwight Friesen. He's been an academic and a professor at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. Some of you have relationships with individuals there. And he's been a leader in the church and the faith communities here, and now is going to share with you a little bit about why he sees this as important to him, and kind of understanding his sense of call and person to this sense of ministry. So, Pastor Dwight, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much. It is shocking for me to be able to be with you in this kind of a space. If you would have told me in October that this conversation would be happening, I would not have believed it for a second. I was not in the market for a new job, and I can't believe we're standing here together. And it does feel like there's something happening that I don't think any one of us had anticipated, and maybe we wouldn't even have chosen. And yet here it is before us, and we are asking ourselves, what's next for me? What's next for us? And you're asking that, and I'm asking that, and together I think we're in that space of discernment. Happy New Year to you. I'm glad that you are here, especially in light of it all. And I'm actually a little bit surprised I'm here. I was in San Antonio what is it now, 4 days ago, and found out I was sitting at a restaurant. My wife and I were about to order our second round of drinks and appetizers, and I get this text message from Alaska saying that my flight is canceled. Our flights are canceled. And we drop everything, we run to the airport, and we start. At one point, we had purchased tickets at 3 different airlines to try to get home as soon as we could. And amazingly enough, we got home the same day, actually an hour sooner than we'd originally been scheduled to get home. And so it feels like a treat to be with you. So, I mean, as I have thought about you as a collective, I don't know you individually to be able to think about the things that are on your specific mind. But as I've tried to think about the collective that is St. Luke's, I've tried to think about what are some of the questions that I would have that would be swirling in my heart and in my body, the ones I could articulate and the ones that just feel heavy. And I want to just begin my time by trying to speak to some of those kind of questions. I don't know if I'll be able to address all of the ones that are alive in you, and we'll leave some time for question and response with Mark and myself and whoever else towards the end. But I thought I'd begin by just I thought you might want to know something about who I am. So my name is Dwight Friesen. I'm a Canadian. I grew up in the prairies of Canada. Brandon, Manitoba was my hometown. I'm not a Lutheran. I'm an Anabaptist. I'm a Mennonite. And if you've ever read what Martin Luther said about Anabaptists, it's not all good. That's not, what am I saying with that? I'm saying the times have changed. The times have changed. There is something, okay, I'm a Canadian, I'm an Anabaptist. I came to the States in 1991, shortly after my partner and I were married. This summer we will be celebrating our 32nd anniversary if all goes well. I have been in the Bellevue area. My life has been centered here since 1996. I moved here to pioneer a church, which I pastored for 11 years. I was ordained at that time with an evangelical organization called the Christian and Missionary Alliance. Some of you might know of that denomination. I no longer am. I surrendered my credentials back to them a number of years ago. Deeply concerned around their hermeneutic or their interpretation of Scripture that does not ordain women or LGBTQ+, and I could no longer in good conscience hold that credential. And so I surrendered that a number of years ago. I say that to say my primary commitment is not to a faith tradition. My primary commitment is to discover a way of love that is the embodiment of the triune God, in a sense, in human form. My whole quest in life is to discover a way of faithful presence that looks like Jesus in the real world. I don't know what your vision of who God is. I don't know what picture comes to your mind. You know, I know for some people there's the images of God that are the old white man with a gavel in his hand kind of thing. I have been captured by the person of Jesus since I had a mystical encounter as a young man, and came to understand that if I want to understand what God looks like, I want to look to Jesus. And when I see Jesus, I see someone who kids want to be with. They want to play with them. I see people who are, the people who are most marginalized are the ones who are welcomed and are named and who receive eye contact. I see one who confronts the systems of power, overturns the tables of the powerful. And I think in some ways, if that's what God looks like, then count me in. And I've been on a quest to discover what faithful presence looks like, not just for me as an individual, but as a collective who are located somewhere. And in this case, what does it mean to be St. Luke's in this neighborhood, in this time, and in this place? I don't know if you've noticed, but this neighborhood has changed. People don't show up to church in the same way that they did 25 years ago, 50 years ago, 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, for goodness sakes. something is being invited of us, meaning of the church. What is that? None of us know. None of us have been there before. My life's work has been to study and to listen to this stuff. And that's kind of what I bring with me as I imagine coming to this place. As Mark mentioned, I am a professor at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. I still will be, even as I take on this role. I will be a full-time faculty member and a part-time pastor. My whole career as a pastor has been co-vocational. So I have known what it is, or bivocational, depending on how you use that language. I prefer co because it's, anyway, we can talk about that another time. I've always been committed to being grounded in sort of the real world, if you will. I've always been a little bit suspicious, no offense intended, of professional clergy who get paid to be spiritual, in a sense. And so that's part of that Anabaptist piece in my history. There's this sense of which, how do I tap into that which is most alive for me as a spiritual being, and what does it mean for me out of that place to guide a community as faithfully as I can? That's always been in my imagination. So for all but 2 years, I was a co-vocational leader. And the last number of years have been at the Seattle School. Let me just take a look at my notes here. Okay, so one of the other questions I found myself thinking is, as I was imagining where you are, is how will I pastor St. Luke's? I've already mentioned I'm not a Lutheran. What does that mean? The number one thing that feels important to me is the notion of continuity. What does it mean for me to step into a role so that your experience as a community is recognizable, so that the continuity in worship, in care, and in sort of pastoral leadership or the running of the church is as seamless as possible. That's my primary goal and hope. I'm not here to change things. I'm not here to do it in my way. I'm trying to attend to what is the pattern and the ritual and the meaning that makes St. Luke's, and how do we continue that? Granted, I'm my own person, and I will bring, you can already tell, I bring my own kind of voice. It'll be a little bit different, but my hope and my prayer is that together it would be a truly St. Luke's experience, and that continuity would be felt all the way around. There's an interesting question that I don't know if this is an alive question for any of you, but that for sometimes that question of whose church is it, I think is an interesting one. Mark is not resigning and going away. And what does it mean for me to step into this role? I know you all know this, but the church does not belong to Mark or myself. Theologically speaking, we all know that the church is Christ's church. More specifically, though, I mean, that we get theologically. Practically speaking, though, even when Mark or Pastor Tom back in the day are leading, it still is not their church. The church is you. The church is the people, united in language and word and sacrament, sharing common story and common narrative in the service of your location and your neighbors, and discovering what it is to love God and love neighbor here. And so there's a very real sense in which the church invites and calls forth the leadership from myself, from Mark, from Tom. And it's almost as though the church itself is a dynamic relationship of the collective with the community around us, and the Holy Spirit inviting us to discover a way of life and love together. So it's not really mine or Mark's in that sense. And in fact, we're actually going to be collaborating all the way through. I think that's been made clear over the last few weeks that there'll be ongoing conversations between myself and Mark, with the board, and so on and so forth. One other question that I thought I would speak to is the question of why I would want to do this at all. I already have a full-time job. I wasn't looking for another job. What's in it for me, if you will? I don't even quite know how to answer that, other than I am so excited about this possibility. My love and my call has always been to serve God by serving Christ's church in all of its forms. I've been an academic for the last number of years, and I have been out of direct pastoring. I miss being known on a human level. I'm in a context where I'm a quasi-celebrity, where people read my books and they think that's cool. I want to be in a context where people don't care about that, and they're wanting to see me show up week in and week out as a real human being in a real neighborhood, trying to figure out and listen for what does it mean for us to be the church here and now in our spheres of influence in the everyday stuff of life. I've missed that as an academic. I love the theory, I do. I can talk about it all day long. I didn't start studying theology because of the theory, though. I studied it because of my love for Christ and serving Christ through the church. And so the chance of being, the opportunity to be in a community with you, in a space like this with you, trying to figure out how do we be even more faithfully present in light of our context, to me is the great challenge of our day. You may have noticed the church is in decline, not just St. Luke's, the church in North America. There was a Pew study that came out on December 14th that highlighted that even in the last decade, we've moved from 20% of America's population being religiously unaffiliated to just about 30%. 1/3 of America's population today does not identify religious affiliation as being something in their lives. That invites a different thought about what does it mean for us to be church. And I want to feel that in my body together with you. There's an opportunity, I think, with Mark being, and the family being on pilgrimage for a couple of years or for 18 months, for St. Luke's to listen to itself. Who is St. Luke's collectively? Who are you? What are you looking for? What are you longing for? What's happening in Bellevue? What's happening in this neighborhood? How is it changing? What is it inviting? I think this next 18 months is a chance for us to pay attention to the kinds of changes that might be coming our way, so that when Pastor Mark comes back, you'll be in a better place to take those courageous steps forwards, just like you have in the past as a community, to serve God by serving your neighbor as yourself. I didn't keep track of time very well. Are we about there? Why don't I pause there, and I'll bring Pastor Mark back up here, and if there are things that you've heard yourself saying or that you'd like to bring to the aloud, questions or responses, or if you have questions for me directly or for Mark, please feel free to voice those.
Another fun connection that I was just going to name too that I'd forgotten in my introduction was I'd first heard Pastor Dwight present the first time we met was at a conference at Pacific Lutheran University. You were guest speaking for somebody that I had really wanted to go hear, and he ended up being there in his stead. I was like, well, great, who's this Dwight guy? I came to hear Nate Frombach and just was resoundingly impressed with the way Dwight presented and his conversation there. And then afterwards, I went up to Dwight and I said, hey, I'm also thinking about doing a doctorate, thinking about maybe a PhD or a doctorate in ministry. And he told me about this program at George Fox, the Semiotics and Future Studies program with Len Sweet. And that really turned me on to that. And so that's the course of study that I selected and I have been done with now for years. But Dwight was the one that got me into that way of thinking. So I'm really curious, as we teach and lead and kind of develop this relationship together, what resonance you all hear in that formation, in that we share the same doctoral work and doctoral advisors. He may not be Lutheran, and I may be Lutheran, but we all have had this other experience with Len Sweet and the Semiotics program that I think is going to put some of our language in sync in maybe ways that's you'll hear that familiarity. So, questions, thoughts, comments?
I have to say, I'm surprised at how nervous I am. I've been a pastor. And
They're a
teacher.
terrifying crowd, man.
I know. It's so weird. It's like I've done this for most of my adult life, and I find myself surprisingly nervous.
It's the masks.
Maybe that's what it is. But, and that makes me think, maybe, if you're wondering, like, can I do this? I'm pretty confident I can. I want you to know that, like, I have been pastoring most of my adult life. I've been teaching people to be pastors most of my adult life. I have the skills, and I'm pretty sure I can do this. I think I'm probably a little bit afraid, just the way you are, about change. You know, this is a big disruption into your community life. None of you are planning for this, but I think we can do it together. Yes?
Oh, my mantra for this next year is peace be with you. You know, I had some occasions where, you know, just some anxiety and nervousness and stuff like that, and a friend of mine sort of yelled, well, relax. And then I prayed about that, and I realized that was Jesus' big message to me, and maybe to you.
Peace.
Relax, peace be with you. That's what we tell each other all the time. God,
That's why we practice that every Sunday. Yeah, that's beautiful. Anything on the live stream? No? Okay.
Oh, yes, over here.
We have, because of the pandemic, put a lot of what potentially are vision and work on hold. And we haven't done much about that because we've been just navigating whatever change was coming our way for the last 18 months, 2 years. Personally, I don't know if that's still the situation or if we're in a better place to actually start talking about a vision and moving that forward. So,
I love that question. So, when I mentioned, there's a couple of things that would be my response. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The question is that during the pandemic, the church has put a pause on enacting some of its vision and mission, and whether this might be whether that will continue or whether there might be a way to engage that work afresh now. I personally am not interested in simply a holding pattern. I'm not just looking to fill in while Mark is gone until he comes back. I do want to do that in terms of a worship gathering, have continuity there. The thing that excites me about this work is actually engaging the adult forum in a way that actually has us very proactively engaged in listening and learning in those realms that I kind of already mentioned in terms of what's the history of the congregation, how have you explored that? You might already have that detailed out. You might know that very well. The stories of courage, the narratives that drive you, the values that are there. I'd like to have that sort of I'd like to explore what that looks like. And then to also do some deep dives in terms of what's happening in the city, the neighborhood, what are the needs, what are the fears. I think actually the fears are one of the key things. How are people in this area, what are they afraid of as they look to the future? In so many ways, we as people who are, in a sense, prisoners of resurrection hope, we don't shy away from those places. We move toward them, and through our presence in those places of greatest fear, we demonstrate hope. And I think attending to that is part of what I would be wanting us to do is like, what is the invitation coming to St. Luke's through our neighborhood and through our neighbors? I also think it's really important for us to listen not only to our neighbors immediately, but to do some forecasting in terms of, like, how will climate change the way we do church in the next 15 years? Well, how will that impact us? How can we begin anticipating now ways that we could begin, like, listening to that and preparing ourselves so that we're not caught unaware? So there's a kind of deep listening and learning that feels like I'm not here to lead into a new way, but I do think that my skill set, in light of my parish work, I've visited hundreds of parish churches all over the world, had a chance to walk neighborhoods with leaders. That's kind of what I do, is like listen for how are communities experimenting, discovering faithful presence where they are, so that their neighbors are more likely to lean into their future with hope and courage rather than cynicism and despair. That's kind of I'm not the primary one to sort of enact that mission, I don't think, but I think this is an amazing time to listen and learn together. Just, Pastor Mark mentioned the idea of sort of that monastic connection at Holden Village. You might know this already, but part of the early development of the monastic tradition within Christianity, in the early centuries of Christianity, was actually in response to, or it was actually a way of rejecting or critiquing the Roman Catholic or the Orthodox at that time, whatever you want to call it, the early church's collusion with power and systems of power. And the monastic movement was a way of saying, we think that collusion of church and state, church and power, is not where the ministry of Christ is most realized. And I find myself, I think it's really curious at a time when religion is politicized in this country, the marriage of church and state it's kind of like dancing in a new kind of way. The idea that your pastor is being sent on pilgrimage into sort of this monastic space to step back from the systems of church power and listen to what might be emerging, what might be invited of a new way of being the people of God for the sake of the world. It feels congruent with the earliest development of the monastic tradition. And it just makes me excited for what your future might be. I mean, we don't know what that looks like. I have no idea. But the fact that you're risking that, I just think is a remarkable thing. I don't know if I'm answering your question or responding very well, but that's where my mind takes me.
Tom had a question.
Well, I have a
Separate
separate question.
question. Keep riffing on that.
Pastor Mark, do you want to speak a little bit to some of the stuff that you've been working on with respect to growth that will now get sort of kicked off? I think you have a few things you might say on that.
Yeah, so we've been, over the course of the pandemic, it does feel like we've just been responding, and adapting to challenges and issues. We've been learning to live stream, we've been learning to do all these things, but I think now we're getting enough space, or at least I thought before a couple weeks ago, we were getting enough space kind of out of the pandemic where we could start answering the question, what did we learn about ourselves in the midst of all of this? And I think we learned a lot. I think we learned we can change. We can do it quickly if we need to. We can embrace technology in ways that we've never dreamed of. We can do a lot of these things, and we can do it decently well. It's pretty impressive. I think we're still kind of not as far out of the pandemic as I imagined we were, so there's still some learning to do. There's still some opportunities for us to respond and adapt. But also over the course of the pandemic, I've been seeding kind of conversations and putting things together about partnerships. We're exploring a partnership with a Chinese congregation that may not just become tenants, but partners in ministry in Bellevue. We're exploring new ways of being cluster churches together around different ministry expressions. And so as I do this Holden Village project, I'm also imparting into the cluster a system of ministry site reviews. So we're going to review and kind of get the lay of the land on all of the cluster ministry partners so that we can better put things together for the future church, so we can better and more effectively collaborate. Right now, what it seems like is we're just kind of randomly sticking things together and hoping they work. I think if we took a deep dive and really did a ministry site analysis of all of our congregations, we could really robustly partner and collaborate in meaningful ways going forward. So those are some of the things. Is that some of the things that you were hoping I would talk about? Yeah.
While you were talking there, it just made me, what came to mind is our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren in some cases. I think for many people, as you look to the future, you're concerned about where are they? Where are they in church? One of the primary sort of segments that I want us to listen to is to our youth and to actually, if you have grandchildren or great-grandchildren, to encourage you to have conversations around their fears and their concerns and what they see on the horizon. In so many ways, the Church of God is here to help people find a way to live into their future with courage and love and life in the way of Christ. Our primary mission is not to get them here necessarily. Isn't that weird? And yet, in this kenotic, self-emptying way, when we help people thrive without trying to get them here, they end up coming here. It's counterintuitive. It's like no one goes to Google for the sake of Google. You know what I mean? You go to Google because you're looking for something. You're looking for answers. You're looking for resources that you desperately need in some way. Church is like that. Church is not an end in and of itself. We go to church because we are looking for something. The more active and aggressive or creative we can be in helping resource people and giving them the very best that they need to thrive, they keep coming back. And that's a shift that I think we might want to attend to. What are the things that people need to thrive? What pain are they suffering? How do they feel alone? How do they feel abandoned, not cared for, not seen? And how do we help see and care for and name? I think that's part of the shift.
And I think the paradox that you're articulating here is resonant in the Lutheran tradition as we think about the paradox of the theology of the cross, right? I mean, it's that self-emptying, that kenotic life-giving, but then paradoxically life-receiving paradox that we articulate in the cross. What other questions are out there? Yeah, Heather.
One of the things, and the word paradox kind of fits, but one of the things on my mind right now is how do we find that space where we are not being overly structured in going into this time so that we squelch what could be, what the mysterious can present to us. And yet, how do we provide enough structure that we can be intentional about self-reflection, that we can make the most, that we can be open to and aware of the data that we need to gather, and that we can process it in such a way that we can do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of holding both of those pieces of, not being too rigid and, having
Yep.
an idea going forward of exactly what we want on the other side.
Right.
But then also not being so unstructured that we lose something that would be valuable.
In some ways, so how do we hold in tension those two values of being structured and rooted in continuity, but also being open to change and what the future might hold up for us? Sort of that, this is the way we've always done things, and holding on to the continuity of that, because it's important, held in tension with how do we need to make some necessary changes so we can see the future. Does that capture your question?
Yeah, and specifically in our process of the next.
And particularly in our next 18 months, how do we do that? Yeah. On one hand, I think, me included, change is scary for me. I don't love change a lot. But at the end of the 18 months, wouldn't it be the same? Wouldn't it be a shame if we were the same? So how do we have this as an opportunity to be authentically, as Dwight said, be authentically St. Luke's, connected and congruent, but also be open to the risk of this process? And that's a tension I think that's really important. Yeah, maybe I'll let you answer that question.
Well, so I'm still developing my response to that question. I've asked to meet with the board at the next board meeting to talk a little bit about this very question because it feels really important to me. I'm a bit of a research nerd. This is kind of what I do. And so I have already created a spreadsheet that has every week of the next 18 months listed on there. I've got it mapped to the church calendar, and I'm beginning to toy with what I think might be some of the big buckets for us to listen for and listen through, and how to collect the data. So what I want to begin, the board conversation I want to have is actually crafting some learning outcomes, probably broken around the church calendar. Different seasons will have primary learning outcomes and different sort of foci for that. Because this is an opportunity who's ever heard of this happening before? That you said a pastor gets sent on pilgrimage to come back later on so that you can pick up where you left off and move in a new direction? I've never heard of this before. And I want us, I mean, my tendency is to like create learning outcomes, and I want to structure all of the adult forums around the conversations that we need to have as a collective in order to be the church that St. Luke's needs to be for the sake of Bellevue into the future. And so that may sound really nerdy, and it may be way, it may be too academic ultimately. Like and I'm happy to jettison it if need be. I don't know what it will be like. I don't know what kind of care St. Luke's needs. We don't know what is going to happen in the community 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now. And so those learning outcomes have to be held fluidly. But boy, like, I really do believe that God is doing something new. God's not caught off guard by the decline of the church. We are. And we're experiencing, what's her name? Harvard professor, Parks, Sharon Parks. She always says that people aren't afraid of change. Most people in the church long for change. They long to hear the running footsteps of kids throughout the auditorium. They want to see kind of the things disrupted. What we fear is not change. What we fear is loss, she says. And I think that is so true. I mean, we're creatures of habit, and we come to rely on certain things, and the thought of not having them in the way we've had them can be terrifying. But as people of resurrection hope, we do not grieve loss as those without hope. We look at loss and we do so in such a way that allows us to own it and to enter into the suffering, but also to anticipate newness of life. And that's the thing. Like, I want us to look at the deepest parts of our systems that have us being the kind of community that we are right now. The system is not broken. Our system is producing exactly what what the church in America, we're producing exactly what the system is designed to produce. How do we attend to that and imagine making changes to the system to become even more life-giving? There's something here that feels like an invitation. Again, that would be my riff. I think it's going to be the first little while that we're together. I think a big part of it will be setting the learning agenda together as a collective, because I'm kind of an asset-based community development guy, meaning that I believe that the answers that St. Luke's needs are already always present within the community here. We are what the community needs. So the question is, can we be courageous enough to both ask the questions that we dare not ask and voice our response, our honest response to those questions? If we can do that courageously and not just think of ourselves, but think of our neighbors and our young, I think we'll be in good space. But we'll need each other because it's scary to do that. It's scary. It can disrupt us. So.
But again, there's a paradox. That's like, it's scary and there's terror maybe in there, but there's also like, it's exhilarating, right? I mean, it's refreshing and renewing and exciting to think about being the church in the future. And I don't know, I've as an extreme sports guy, I know that feeling really well of like, wow, this is really scary, but this is going to be really fun. Remember when Pastor Kirby, Bishop Kirby installed me, he said, this is a pastor that jumps off mountains. And this is kind of what it feels like. Other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? So the timeline here, what we're going to the way this is going to work out for the next couple weeks is Pastor Dwight and I are going to work on co-officiating and co-leading some worship services. So you don't just jump right from me right to Pastor Dwight, but there'll be a warm transition, a soft transition. So we'll move to kind of co-officiating and co-leading some things next week and on the 16th. And then we'll do a sending Sunday. I'm refusing to use the word last Sunday. My sending Sunday will be the 23rd. And then we will send me to the village, and I'll join the life of the village up there. And I know some people are wondering, what does it look like to be the pastor at Holden Village? You're really a chaplain to that community. There's people that are there because they're highly motivated to be a part of the church. There's people that are up there because they're skeptical and they're seeking and they're looking for something and they don't know what that is. And I get to be their pastor too. And so it's a really, it's much broader than just planning and executing worship services. It's, you're really participating in the life of the whole village, from the bus mechanics to the cooks to the garbologists to the electric, the generator runners and all of that stuff. I really get to be kind of that storyteller and that chaplain for the whole community up there. And there'll be opportunities for you to come to Holden Village, to be a part of what's going on up there. And of course, as we've named, there'll be opportunities for me to be out of the village. We'll all be back here worshiping and leading worship here at St. Luke's. In fact, my work at Pacific Lutheran University as a member of their Board of Regents will continue. And so every time I'm out of the village for one of those meetings, I'm going to be here with you. And so, in fact, you'll send me on the 23rd, but I'll be back in the middle of February, so you'll hardly miss me. And then you'll see me right back again.
It might be worth noting that I will be absent for the 23rd. It's not that I wouldn't love to be there, but there's a few speaking engagements that I have already on the books that I just have to follow through with. And I'll be doing a training for the Episcopal Church for their young leaders in Alabama for those on that week. Actually, I'll start my training on the Monday.
And for those of you like me who are unfamiliar with anything east of Idaho, Alabama is actually quite a ways away.
Quite a distance, yeah. So I'm really sad that I can't be here, but I'm so grateful that you're crafting a time to send and commission Mark and the family as they go. So my first Sunday will be the 30th, and I'm so looking forward to stepping into that and discovering what that'll look like.
It's going to be great. Any other parting comments, questions, anything like that? I think we might be there. Anything else from you, Tom? Thanks for this conversation. Thank you for being here and listening and asking your questions. I really do appreciate it. If you've got questions that you want to take offline, you don't want to ask in the big group, or comments that you want to have, make sure to reach out to me, to Tom, to Dwight, and we'll be available for more conversations beyond this as well. So,
can I offer a little poem as a little benediction to our time today? My father-in-law, I was talking with my father-in-law last night for New Year's Eve, or I guess that was New Year's Day, wasn't it? And he reminded me of an old poem by Minnie Louise Haskins. That's called The Gate of the Year. And it was famously quoted by King George on a radio broadcast way back in the day. I'll just read the first stanza. The Gate of the Year by Minnie Louise Haskins. And I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown." And he replied, "Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than a light and safer than a known way." So I went forth, and finding the hand of God, trod gladly into the night. And he led me towards the hills, the breaking of the day, into that lone east. Friends, we don't know what tomorrow holds, but we serve one who does. Be of good courage. You are not alone, and you are loved. Grace and peace.